I want to introduce Jesús Armas, who's going to talk about our approval process.
Thank you, George. Overnight. And yet, we also have to contend with various agencies that are involved in determining whether the project should move forward or not. George mentioned that we have both a hospital and a medical office building as part of this comprehensive project. One way to help think about the difference here is to distinguish the hospital from the medical office building. The hospital is subject to an under-state jurisdiction, which means that the State Office of Hospital Planning and Development is responsible for reviewing the hospital, determining whether it meets state standards, and either granting approval or not. On the other hand, when we start looking at the medical office building, the medical building gets reviewed, considered, and either approved or not by the county. In the context of the county, that also means that we need to look at some changes in the land use regulations. Presently, most of the campus is identified as a hospital or medical related uses, with a portion directed toward other uses, principally where the Pinecone apartments are located. The Pinecone apartments are zoned residential. Well, in order to meet the goal that George described of allowing the current hospital to remain open while the new one is constructed, a number of years ago, Sutter did buy the Pinecone apartments, and the intent here, if you've had a chance to look at the aerial, it may have become apparent. The intent here is to really use the area where the Pinecone apartments are located as a site where the new hospital can be constructed while the present one remains open. That actually requires some consideration by the county. And so we've begun the process of going through the county review efforts, initially by going through the Municipal Advisory Council, the Castro Valley MAC. Later, we're going to be going to the County Planning Commission and ultimately to the Board of Supervisors. Because there is a helistop on site, we also have to get it reviewed and essentially determined as consistent by an entity called the Airport Land Use Commission. We're on track to have this considered by the various bodies early in the spring. In order to consider a project of this magnitude, though, you have to evaluate the impacts associated with the project from the standpoint of traffic, from the standpoint of noise, from the standpoint of any lighting and shadowing on adjoining properties. And so that takes the form of the preparation of an environmental impact report. The EIR, as it's commonly called, is actually reaching the level where it's going to be ready for public distribution. We anticipate it will be available for public review starting mid-November. Under state law, there's about a 45-day period in which interested individuals, organizations, agencies can review and comment on that. And so we anticipate the comment period to conclude approximately by the end of the calendar year. Thereafter, the project applicant will be responsible to address comments that are identified during the comment period that I mentioned. There will also be an opportunity to offer oral comments. We're working with the county to schedule a hearing before the County Planning Commission to allow those comments to be expressed orally. Obviously, if folks are interested, they can simply submit written comments in the form of letters or emails and the like. I mentioned that we have to go through the land use process, and that also requires consideration by the Planning Commission. Ultimately, those will take the forms of recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, your elected officials, who will be asked to make a decision on whether or not to proceed with this project. Based on our schedule, we anticipate that the board will be asked to consider the project in late spring, early summer of next year. So as we take a look roughly at the schedule that I just outlined, in order to meet the January 2013 schedule or deadline that George spoke of, we really have to work backward, even though it appears to be a long time away. When you factor in all the review processes and modifications that may be necessary, in practical terms, for a project of this size, it's almost around the corner. In order to take advantage of time, though, we're doing some concurrent reviews. The state is actually already inclined to begin to examine the structural elements of a facility of this size. They have to make sure, as was noted previously, that it conforms to a very technical and engineering standard to make sure it can withstand an earthquake. And if you've seen the newspaper of late, you know there's been a lot of coverage about the Hayward Fault. It's a significant anniversary upon us. It's one that really underscores the importance of replacing this facility, because it's critical to being able to respond and provide service when the Hayward Fault ruptures. It will rupture, it's only a question of when. And so we need to be ready. Assuming the reviews that are noted there, we would expect to get the entitlements next summer, ultimately commencing construction as shown here. The expectation is that it will be completed in late 2012 for occupancy in January of 2013. The important part is we're also looking at concurrent development of the hospital and the medical office building as a way of minimizing impacts to the neighborhood and the like. So this represents the schedule, and then what we'd like to do now is have the Vinnie Group, our architectural team, Sean, if you will, present the renderings and what the project represents.